could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George,
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your program once again.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of your Beatles News Briefs podcast. I'm your host Steve Marinucci, your Beatles news guy, and today we have some live breaking news for you. We have a report direct from the Fest for Beatle Fans with Susan Ryan, who is a panel moderator for several panels this weekend. And she is also the owner of Fab4NYCWalkingTours.weebly.com. And she's going to tell us what's going on at the fest and how things are. She's attended many fests over the past years. She's been a regular attendee at both Chicago and New York. So we'll talk about what's going on with the fest this weekend. And away we go to Jersey City, New Jersey. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Steve Marinucci, host of Beatles News Briefs, and I'm on the phone with Susan Ryan, direct from the Fest for Beatle Fans in Jersey City. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Steve. It's great to hear your voice and talk to you today.
It's great to hear you, too. You're there for what reason? To promote your walking tours in New York. What's the website for the walking tours?
So my walking tours are Fab4 NYC Walking Tours. If you go to look up Fab4 NYC Walking Tours or Beatles Tours Susan Ryan, you'll find me. I'll come right to the top.
Okay.
And you can book a tour with me. I do private tours of New York City for Beatles fans to go to a bunch of interesting sites related to the band. Of course, related to John Lennon in New York City.
Right.
And at the fest, I am one of the moderators in the panel discussion room, and I program the panelists, and been having a great weekend here, just enjoying seeing all the people and having fun with friends and doing some interesting and lively discussions. So it's been awesome.
How's the crowd? How big is the crowd?
Well, it's Sunday morning, so ask me in about an hour. No, I'm kidding. Sunday morning can be quiet until it gets going. It's still
True.
Early on Sunday. But the crowd's been pretty good. We've had a decent sized crowd. Yesterday, Saturday, of course, is the most busy day.
Right.
So I would estimate there were a few thousand people here in and out during the day. The dealer room has been doing well. The discussion panels have been full. And with so many discussion panels, we have 2 rooms running. So it's been really great.
Have you seen any of the guests?
I have seen a few of them. Unfortunately, I am tied to the discussion room with a short tether because I'm a moderator, but I've run into them in the hallways. So we have here this weekend Eddie Deason, who was in I Want to Hold Your Hand, and other people like Gary Burr, who was in with Ringo and the Roundheads, and we have some other musicians and lots of authors that you might have heard of. We've got Kid O'Toole, and we've got Kenneth Womack and Jude Sutherland Kessler. David Bedford has come all the way from Liverpool with a new book.
Yeah, I saw his post, and I know my friend Alan Cozen is there. So
Alan Cozen and his co-author Adrian Sinclair talking about the second volume of the McCartney Legacy, and we found out this weekend exclusively that the 3rd volume has been greenlit, so they are working on the 3rd volume, and it should be out at some point in the next. I want to say in the next year. I'm going to give it a long time. If it comes out sooner, that'll be better. But they are working on a 3rd volume.
Okay, are you working on a book?
I'm not working on a book right now. I have a book that I did several years ago, along with David Bedford and Richard Porter, tour guides from Liverpool and London, called The Beatles Fab Four Cities. And I do have copies with me, but I'm not working on a new book at the moment. But you never know what the future may bring. If I find the right project, I will be working on a new book. But it's nice to be able to see people who've taken my tours and who like the book. And that's been productive this week, and it's been really great.
Have you talked to Mark Lapidus by chance?
I have. I always talk to Mark. He's running around, as he does at a fest. He's a very busy man, but he's, I think, enjoying seeing everything running smoothly as it does. The amazing staff is making things work really well. Mm-hmm. And Mark is, as usual, reveling in the fact that he can bring all us fans together. And I think that he should be justifiably proud of what the fest has been for the last 51 years.
Yeah, I mean, it's really kind of amazing the way it started out and then it's grown. I attended a few of them in LA, and I things have gotten a little bigger since then, especially after the anniversary in 2014.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's been really something how that has grown.
Oh, it has very much. I mean, my first fest was a long time ago. My very first fest was 1977 in New York, and I've been
Who'd
doing
you
it.
see? Who did you see?
Oh God, 1977. I don't think I remember
No,
the early. Yeah, it's funny because I was overwhelmed by the whole thing. I was a 15-year-old kid. What did I
right,
know?
right.
But I know that in '79, so I'd already been to two fests. Prior to that, I got to meet Klaus Vorman for the first time there, and a whole bunch of other people. I do know that there were some authors who've written some, now classic Beatles books were there. And, I was so overwhelmed. I mean, I was a 15-year-old kid. I was there for one day, but
Hmm.
had a wonderful time, and I've been coming ever since. So this is basically, I've been coming to the fest for 48 years.
Oh,
Yeah.
you've been every year.
I have. I missed a few in the 80s when I didn't have a car and the fest was in New Jersey, but basically have not missed a single fest since 1991 in New York and since 2000 in Chicago.
Well, I,
So, I went intermittently in the 80s and 90s or 70s and 80s, but yeah, so I've been going rather consistently, and certainly for the last, I want to say 25 to 35 years, I haven't missed any.
wow.
Yeah.
I've only been to a few. My first one was in L.A. to meet Cynthia Lennon. Had to meet Cynthia Lennon, and as it turns out, my friend and I, Joe Caldwell and I, happened to catch her in a quiet room. I think there was a bar off of the dealer's room,
Yes.
and we actually sat and talked with her for quite a while. In fact, Joe and I were just talking about this the other day. But she was great. And then I remember talking to Astrid.
Yes.
Uh, remember we talked to Astrid. However,
Hmm.
my best moment, and I'm almost embarrassed to say this on the air. Joe and I were walking by the room where all the bands play, and I heard the song. Somebody was singing "Hungry," the Paul Revere and the Raiders song,
Hmm.
and I said, I turned to Joe and I said, "That sounds like Mark Lindsay," because I'm a huge Paul Revere and the Raiders fan. I opened the
Hmm.
door and it is Mark Lindsay,
Oh, that's
and
great.
I literally went nuts. And
Yep.
after he got off the stage, I ran down the hall and cornered him and got his autograph and shook his hand. And that made my Beatle Fest right there, meeting Mark Lindsay.
And you never know who you might run into these at these fests. I mean, I know that people have shown up. There was one year I missed them, but there was one year when Patty Boyd was here, and late at night, Ron Wood showed up to see his friend Patty and jammed with a couple of the bands that were playing in the lobby. And I found out about it the next day, completely missed it. But you never know who you might run into. He just showed up because he knew Patty was in town, and there you go.
I
So
remember, I
kind of the
remember,
same kind of thing.
yeah, I remember seeing two celebrities, not on that order, but I remember seeing actor David Caruso in an elevator,
Yes.
and I also
Hmm.
remember being in the dealer's room, and in walks Bill Maher, and
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, so that
You
was
never
kind of
know who's a
interesting.
fan.
You never know. And then
Yeah.
I also went to one Beatle Fest, and I think it was when he was up in the San Francisco area. The one time,
Hmm.
Billy Preston. That was either in L.A. or in in the San Francisco area. I can't remember
Hmm.
which one, but those were great.
Yeah.
Those were great memories. I will never forget. I have memories. I mean, I would have loved to have been there when Harry Nilsson was around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because Mark told me some good stories about that in one of my
Hmm.
earlier podcasts, and
Yeah.
there are some great stories. I bet you that people have great stories of the
Oh, they
Beatle
sure
Fest.
do. They
So,
sure do. I was lucky. I met Harry at one of his last fests,
mhm,
before he died. So he was lovely. He used to really do some great appearances here, and he raised a lot of money for the coalition to stop gun violence,
right.
and really was amazing what he did. And just we miss him. I mean, I know Harry was a fixture here for a while. Of course, we're sorry that he's not with us anymore, but it was always lovely to see him at a fest.
Was he your favorite guest, or do you have another one that?
He was one of my favorite guests. I have to say that meeting Klaus Vorman and Astrid Kirscher was up there. They were
Yep.
lovely. And who else? I met so many people. It's like, you come to these fests and you get up close and personal with people. So it's interesting when you hear stories, like when Billy J. Kramer comes and he talks to you about the early days of coming to New York with Brian, or
Hmm.
talks about his, how Brian managed his career or, folks like Lawrence Juber who will get up there and play beautiful guitar and talk to you about when he was in Wings.
Hmm.
Or, so it's always nice. And of course, we lost him recently. Joey Molland of Badfinger
Oh,
was a
yes.
fixture here for many years. And
Right.
the most lovely man. You could never hope to meet a nicer person. He would take his time with the fans. He would chat with people, take photos. Just the kindest, nicest man I have ever met.
Yes, I
And
remember talking to him at Beatle Fest and seeing him perform. And I also did an interview with him that I posted a couple of weeks ago on this podcast that where he talked about working with George Harrison and Todd Rundgren and being in Badfinger and the whole thing. And it was a really beautiful interview.
yeah,
But yeah,
they've done a nice tribute to him. The band has done a tribute to Joey every night, and
oh, they
it's been
have.
really nice
Oh,
playing Badfinger songs and remembering him because he was such a fixture here for a while, and it doesn't seem the same because he was here several years, and knowing that he isn't here is sad, So we want to remember him with love, and I think everybody here does because he was just such a lovely human being.
what are your plans
Yeah.
for the rest of the fest?
Well, I just came from a discussion about seeing Paul McCartney in the UK. My husband and I went with some friends and saw him in Manchester, so we had a little panel about that. But later on, I'm going to be interviewing a woman named Lori Kay, and
Oh,
Lori
yes,
has a. So Lori worked for RKO Radio, and she has a book called Confessions from a Real Name Dropper, and she did John Lennon's very last interview just hours before he died, and we're going to have a little discussion later about that. But we've had so many wonderful things going on the whole weekend. There's going to be an academic panel. We're going to have some educators talking about the future of Beatles fandom and how to educate people about the Beatles.
Hmm,
We're going to have a multi-generational fan panel. So we're going to have representatives of Boomer, Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z. We're not up to Gen Alpha yet, but I bet you by the next fest we'll have a Gen Alpha kid.
probably.
And yeah, they're getting older. And it's going to be an interesting discussion of how different generations experience the fandom because it is very different depending on who you are and how old you are.
That subject has interested me too. That's a whole interesting discussion. The perspective of people like us who saw it from the beginning and the people, that are young that have approached it from what they've seen. And, it's very interesting how much it's grabbed them as much as it grabbed us. And it's amazing. Only the Beatles, I don't think there's any other group that's ever done that. Only the Beatles, I think,
Mhm.
have had that kind of hold on everybody.
Yeah,
So,
the multi-generational aspect is certainly something. I mean, the fact is that I found in my experience, you don't really have to teach kids to like the Beatles. All you have to do is play the music and they like it.
hmm.
So to see, young, Gen Z people, there were plenty of them. And my son is one of them, but he's not here this weekend. But there's a young woman here who's a TikTok influencer named Skylar Moody. And she is a social media expert. She is the experience of the Gen Z Beatles fan. And believe me, she has as much passion as any original generation fan, but her way of experiencing the fandom is different. And I think that's the most fascinating thing is that there are so many generations of fans now. I mean, you get grandma, daughter, and granddaughter all going to concerts and fests, you
Hmm.
know. So there's so many different people all experiencing the fandom, and yet the passion is always there. Everybody all, no matter what, has the same kind of passion for the Beatles, their music, their style, everything about them. And I don't think this will ever die. I really think that we are fortunate to have a multi generational appeal.
I thought I read that there was some kind of discussion from a woman's perspective of the Beatles this weekend.
That wasn't this weekend, but that was last year. There's a woman in Australia, a professor, Christine Feldman Barrett, who wrote a book called The Women's History of the Beatles.
Hmm.
And she was actually here last year. We had a whole discussion about the experience of women in the Beatles fandom. And it's a very interesting study. Nobody's actually really done it. And I mean, all right, I'm a little biased. I was interviewed for Christine's book, but I can tell you, aside from that, it's a really excellent book because it really talks about it's not what you think it is. It's not like, I mean, yes, screaming fans, yes, but it's about so much more than that. It's about people who have turned their love for the Beatles into a career. People who have turned it in, they become writers, or they become like me, a tour guide, or they've become teachers who just want to, do this because of being Beatles fans. So I think the women's voices are very important, and I think that it is celebrated at the fest. We do have lots of panels with women, and it's really a lot of fun. And the more that we have the women's voices in the fandom, the better it is.
Okay. Okay.
Mhm.
Well, thank you. I'm not going to keep you much longer, Susan. I really,
Mhm.
really appreciate you're doing this, and thank you for those comments. That's great. Have a great time.
Thank
The
you.
rest of the let's see, it's now 2 o'clock. And what time does it close tonight?
Well, the concert will start probably around 8:30. So as long as they play, I'm figuring the whole thing will be over between 10:30 and 11 o'clock tonight.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So we're still going. It goes about 12 hours on Sunday. So
Right.
it's going to be going strong, and then we will adjourn until Chicago in August, and again until New York next year.
Okay.
So yeah, but it's been a pleasure chatting with you,
It's
Steve, and
been a
I,
been a pleasure chatting with you too, Susan. You take
right,
care and have a good time. Say hello to everybody that's around
I
there.
will.
Is there anybody close to you, by the way?
Standing with me, not really. People are coming out of a panel room,
Oh, okay.
but
Okay.
no, nobody really nearby. But
Okay.
yeah, I tried to do this in a relatively quiet place, which is hard to find, but I did. But it was a
Yeah,
pleasure,
you did.
Steve.
All
It was a
right,
pleasure.
Susan. You
All
take
right.
care. Thank you very much, Susan Ryan, for talking to us live and direct from the Fest for Beatle fans in Jersey City. I thought this was a great time to talk about a question that we posted on our Beatles News and Information page recently on Facebook, and the question was, "What Beatles album?" And I said it could be a solo album, though I suspect for most it'll be a Beatles album. Introduced you to the band. If it was a single, I said you're welcome to say so, but also please mention the first album that was the reason you became a fan. I have to say, listening to the Beatles channel on Sirius XM with all the mix of Beatles songs and covers was really the inspiration for the question. The question got a lot of response, a little more than I expected. Here's just a few of the responses. Mariah Warren said, "Love Me Do," October 1962. Karen Bridgman said, "The February 9th, 1964 Ed Sullivan Show introduced the Beatles to me specifically when Paul sang Close Your Eyes. My father bought Meet the Beatles for my sister. However, that album has been in my possession forever. Possession is 90% of the law." Stacy Brown said, "My aunt had a Chipmunks sing the Beatles album, and I played it over and over and over it when I was little. I learned all the words. Then I became a big Wings fan first. Still had no idea Paul's connection to the Chipmunks album or the Beatles. And then when I was 12, I discovered the Beatles and realized Wings was after them, and Chipmunks was a parody. It all came together. I became a huge fan, and shortly thereafter, John Lennon was murdered." Tony DeLulio said, "My sister's boyfriend had the singles on VJ, Tolly, and Swan Records and brought them over to play on my, quote, record player, unquote. I listened till the grooves were worn, and I still have them." Eva Jones said, "Meet the Beatles. I still have the LP from 1964. The song was I Want to Hold Your Hand. We watched the band on the Ed Sullivan Show twice that month, a little black and white screen. We listened to the WABC from New York on our transistor radios. Cousin Brucey was Beatles Central. He had all the news." And I agree with you there, Eva. I listened to Cousin Brucey myself on WABC. Rick Boyer said, "Serious answer, the Chipmunks sing the Beatles hits." There's another one for you. Greg Rappa said, "In June 1974, when I was 5, my eldest brother played me the Let It Be 8-track, and I have been hooked ever since." Andy Rosenthal said, "I was born in the 1970s and remember that there was a release of Got to Get You Into My Life sometime around 1976, so that might be my first radio exposure. But my first album was the White Album circa winter of 1981. I won't lie, it freaked me out as a kid, but I've grown to love it, and on any given day, it's my favorite. But imagine a 10-year-old hearing Happiness is a Warm Gun and its composer having just been murdered with one. I was pretty convinced that the world was tilting off its axis, as we all felt in 1980. Woody Jones said, "Swiping Mom's copy of Beatles 65 around 1971 when I was 4. Okay. Dorothy Jean said, I was part of the second wave of Beatle fans in the mid-'70s. A Hard Day's Night was movie of the week on the Philadelphia UHF station, so they played it 2 or 3 times that week. The song that got me hooked was I Should Have Known Better. The harmonica was in the minor key, the melody, the luggage car scene. It was magical. I asked for Greatest Hits Red Album for Christmas that year, and the rest is history. Glenna Lawrence Foreman said Revolver. I liked the cover. I wanted to buy a Beatles album. I was 12. That was 1972. I did see them on Sullivan, but I was 3. Later, well, you see what happened. I also got a response from Tom Frangione of the Beatles channel, who said, while I completely prefer the original British albums, I got turned on to the Fabs via the US album Meet the Beatles. Author Robert Rodriguez, whose books include Revolver, How the Beatles Reimagined Rock and Roll and Solo in the 70s, said, the Red and Blue albums, Autumn 73, I was introduced them at school through our music teacher. And Bill King, the publisher of Beatle Fan, who I've known forever, said, for me it was Sullivan. Then the next day, Dad brought home I Want to Hold Your Hand without being asked, and then Meet the Beatles. If you have a response, send it to BeatlesNewsBriefs@gmail.com, and we may include it in a future show. If you'd like to get a hold of us, you can write me and write the show at BeatlesNewsBriefs@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. We may read your letter on the air. Who knows? So if you want to ask questions, feel free to do so. And you can find us on Facebook on our Beatles News and Information page, where we post basically what the name says, news and information. And we post a lot of it. So come on by and talk Beatles with us and all our wonderful members. And you can hear all of our shows from our most recent to our very first at our new Blogspot archive, BeatlesNewsBriefs.blogspot.com. You can listen to as many as you want. It won't cost you a cent. And that's all for now. We hope you enjoyed the show. This is Steve Marinucci saying, if you like the show, please subscribe. Please give us a great review, because Google loves great reviews. And we'll be back soon, we hope. If we'll find something to report on, and we'll be back and give you a new show. But the one thing that we're going to try and do here is do serious Beatle talk. And so if you like what we're doing, please subscribe. Until next time, this is Steve Marinucci saying,
be seeing you. Keep that one. Mark it fab.